Funding for the production of Louisiana, the State We're In, is provided in part by the Ziegler Foundation of Jennings and Gulf States Utilities, helping Louisiana bridge the gap to our energy future.
Good evening, I'm Ken Lormand. Welcome to a special edition of Louisiana, the State We're In. Tonight, a look back at the Republican National Convention. For 4 days this week, the eyes of the world were focused on New Orleans and the Superdome, where Republicans gathered to pick George Bush and Dan Quayle to represent their party in the race for the White House. Tonight, we remember the highlights of this pivotal gathering for the Republicans and examine what this window to the world has meant for New Orleans. But first, let's consider what it means to be a Republican. We posed that question to a number of people at this convention.
I think he's a person more oriented to a philosophy than the average Democrat. Now, when I say the average Democrat, there are most of the people in this state are Republicans who haven't come out the closet yet. So I include a lot of Democrats in that. People who are interested in a political party with a philosophy naturally come to the Republican Party during presidential years when philosophy is so important.
Bill Nungesser chairs the Republican Party in Louisiana. It's a rapidly growing group that now boasts nearly 350,000 members. That's over 3 times as many registered Republicans as in the late 70s, a pivotal period for the party in Louisiana. For it was during that decade that Louisiana elected its first Republican governor since Reconstruction, Dave Treen, largely because of a change in the way Louisiana held its elections.
Well, in 1971, which was the first, well, I guess the second major race by a Republican for governor, the issue that I tried to make was building a 2-party system in Louisiana. At that time, you know, we had the Democrat primary and then the Republican primary, and then you ran the top 2 ran it off. And so it was considerably different then. You had all the Democrats getting behind Edwin Edwards in 1971 against that Republican out there. The election law change that came after that, and as a result of that election, made some major changes in the way we choose our public officials in Louisiana.
UNO political scientist Dr. Susan Howell agrees.
Well, I think the Republican Party, as far as the people are concerned, got a big boost when we started having an open primary system, because then it was no disadvantage to be a registered Republican. You could register Republican and vote for any candidate you wanted. You could vote for your Republican candidate or the Democratic candidate. So since that was when the Republican Party, in terms of registration, started to grow in Louisiana. So that would be about 1976. And it's been pretty steady since then. It's reached about 16% of the voters are registered now in Louisiana Republican.
Early in the state party's history, that 16% share would have seemed an impossible goal.
Well, the Republican Party has been an important party nationwide since 1860, when its first president, Abraham Lincoln, was elected. But the party came south, and that means to Louisiana also after the Civil War, essentially with the bayonets of the Union Army. So it was a very alien, hated party to begin with, and it was associated with radical Reconstruction, a period that most Southerners found very objectionable. Consequently, from about the 1880s down to the 1950s, there was no Republican Party in Louisiana to amount to anything, and virtually no Republican Party in the Deep South as a reaction to its participation of radical Reconstruction. In fact, there was an old joke that went along for many years: if you want to hold a Republican Party convention in Louisiana, hire a phone booth, because you wouldn't need a larger auditorium than that, there being so few Republicans.
But Professor Carleton says in the 50s, Dwight Eisenhower's election gave the party more respectability, and many conservative Democrats in the South began voting Republican. Not even a popular national hero in the White House could change the results of a gubernatorial race in Louisiana.
Democratic nominee and subsequent Governor Robert Kennan had a Republican opponent in the general election. but he didn't even recognize the man. He went off and hunted elk and deer in Wyoming during the general election campaign and came back and scored easily 700,000 votes to his opponent's 13,000. But the Republicans still are obviously not broad-based enough. They are, as they are in most of the other parts of the country, the party of the upper middle class, the professionals, the employers, whereas the Democrats are the party of the employees, the average man, the majority.
Dr. Howell agrees that's how it is generally, but she says Louisiana Republicans are not typical Republicans.
In Louisiana, the Republicans have a certain picture about themselves. That is, they tend to be younger, they tend to be more educated, they tend to be more urban, and those are their demographic characteristics. Their beliefs are even slightly more unique than nationally. That is, the Republican Party in Louisiana has fashioned itself as a reform anti-populist party. They are very strong against corruption in government. Not that anybody's for corruption in government, but they have taken the good government position away from the Democrats.
Another difference is a growing number of Republican converts in this state, Democrats who've changed parties.
Most of the Republicans in Louisiana didn't move here from someplace else. It's not the immigrant factor. It's people who have switched thinking of themselves from Democrat to Republican, and that is unique. Just about any place else you would go, most people grew up Republican, if they are Republican today, or they've always been Republican. So we have a converted Republican Party.
Many of those who switched parties in Louisiana are office holders. The highest ranking convert, Lieutenant Governor Paul Hardy.
President Reagan had a tremendous effect on Louisiana, in particular on the Republican Party in Louisiana. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons that I joined the Republican Party was because of Ronald Reagan. I think he started something that we're going to see George Bush follow up on. And that's one of the reasons I think that George Bush is going to be successful in this election. It's obvious that the Republican Party are encouraging their leaders who want to be elected by the Republican Party and be caucused into positions of leadership to be able to run for election, to realize that they need to support the major planks in the platform, and that is anti-tax and spend policies, for prayer in the schools, pro-right to life, not abortion. They are for SDI, for aid to the Contras.
Andrew Brown is also an example of a Democrat turned Republican. He changed parties 6 years ago mainly for economic reasons.
I'm in the international business. I do business in West Africa. I'm an exporter. And of course, I travel out of the country on a monthly basis. And during the Carter years, it was difficult for me to sell Louisiana products. So what I did is look at, and of course, when President Reagan won back in '80, I sent my wife a telegram and says, please send a letter to President Reagan. 2 weeks later, I had an acknowledgement from President Reagan saying thank you, and we look forward to it. My wife has been a Republican since she's registered.
Brown is an alternate delegate, one of only 2 blacks in the Louisiana delegation, which points to a problem for Republicans, the lack of minority representation. Registered black Democrats in Louisiana outnumber registered black Republicans over 30-1, while overall there are 5 registered Democrats for every registered Republican.
I'm concerned to the point that I've gone out and generated and tried to recruit additional Republicans. When I ran for mayor of the city of Generate 1 year ago, there were approximately 58 black Republicans on poll there. I'm proud to say there are now 102. There were 108 white Republicans. I'm proud to say now there's 216. I doubled the Republican registration in my mayoral race.
Brown says Republicans are suffering from an image problem.
Democrats have done such a good job at free programs, i.e. voucher, food stamps, welfare programs, which creates, as you know, a generation of people who become dependent on the system. What we're talking about doing in the Republican Party is afford people an opportunity to get into private enterprise, talk about creating jobs for themselves, and thereby becoming productive citizens as opposed to relying on government for a living.
Do the Republicans treat you any differently because you're a minority?
I don't think so, Ken. When we had the caucus back in February, there were only 2 blacks at the caucus. That was Ernie Ladd and myself in Matthews, Louisiana. I got the 3rd highest vote, so thus I'm the alternate to Don Bollinger, who is the delegate.
the Republican Party represents the philosophy of many of us who lost our freedom in our homeland and accept this country as our second homeland.
Carlos Estevez is also a minority member of the Republican Party. He was Louisiana's only Hispanic delegate to the Republican convention. He, too, was an alternate. The Metairie insurance agent is originally from Cuba.
I came to this country for principle. I'm looking for freedom. I'm looking for money. I'm looking for jobs. That's the land of opportunities. And this is what the Republican Party really represents. And we cannot take more risk with liberal and left policies because we know how is the life under the socialist and the communist system. So the Republican Party really is our only hope.
Like Andrew Brown, Estevez says the key to minorities gaining power in the Republican Party is involvement.
The true key of the position is that we have to mainstream in America. Hispanics, blacks, Asians, any nationality, this is a country of opportunity. Democracy is that. Diversity of opinion, diversity of philosophies, freedom for all.
How do Hispanics get more involved in this mainstream America that you're talking about?
The opportunity, we have to educate it. Do not be afraid of getting involved. Number one. Number two, get education on democracy. Understand the process within the system.
Although he is the only Hispanic Louisiana Republican delegate in 1988, Estevez is confident there will be many more 4 years from now.
The Hispanic got to learn. We are new in this country, and I think that I'm setting the path for the future generation to get involved. And the truth of the matter of my main reason of doing this is to show the Hispanic people that it's a way within the democratic system. You have to live democracy. Democracy is nothing that you can watch from upstairs. You got to be in the floor. And the way to get in the floor is to get involved. Pay the price of being embarrassed, being defeated, or be a winner. And I was a winner. I took the risk, and I win. So, that's I'm happy.
Does the Republican Party treat you like a minority?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I've been treated in this convention like a king. And I had no complaint, not better or worse than anybody else. And I have the delegate from Alexandria, Baton Rouge, Monroe, the alternates. I'm one of them. So I feel great.
So far, we've looked at several major turning points for the Republican Party in Louisiana, including the Eisenhower presidency and the open primary law. There was another significant stimulus. It came in the form of an actor from California. Now, a look back at the Reagan presidency.
When President Reagan gave his farewell address to the GOP on Monday night, it was a Louisiana delegation that had a front row seat to hear the president give his last address. And it has been mixed reactions that the president has been getting from Louisiana officials during his past 7.5 years in office. President Reagan gave his final remarks in person to many of those Louisiana officials who had worked with him to help change the state's economic conditions and political climate. One who had praise for Reaganomics was former Louisiana Congressman Henson Moore, who now lives in Washington, D.C.
He did everything he'd said he'd do, and the country has prospered greatly for him. Louisiana, the only way we're going to come out of our doldrums is to continue that kind of prosperity. If we go back into a tax and spend kind of a thing and puts the country on ice or puts us into a recession, Louisiana will never come out of the depression we're in. We need more republicanism in the form of Ronald Reagan.
But another former congressman who served while Reagan was in office says the state did not help itself when the president failed to adopt a national energy policy.
Well, if he could have increased the price of oil, I could give that a definite yes, but he didn't cause the price of oil to go down. I mean, you know, Democrats love to beat on Ronald Reagan for hurting the Louisiana economy. That's nonsense. We hurt the Louisiana economy. I mean, we just didn't do our job. We didn't diversify. We found ourselves hostage to the Middle East. Saudi Arabia hurt this economy. Now, Ronald Reagan's at fault because he didn't have an energy policy. If the president had, that would have helped Louisiana. In that sense, he hurt us. But in the sense of confidence, trust, working with us, I have nothing but good things to say about it.
However, other Louisiana officials who have served with Reagan in Washington feel the outgoing chief executive has been good for the Bayou State, both economically and politically.
Well, I think politically, Ronald Reagan's probably been the most influential president we've had to affect Louisiana state government. We now have 4 members of Congress who are Republican for the first time in our history. I think that's likely to stay. I think we've seen dynamic growth in the state legislative delegation. And Ronald Reagan has held out accountability and fiscal control as the principal plank of his presidency.
Our problems were related to certain industries, particularly the oil industry, the inland marine industry, the farming industry. All of those have been down, and they hit us all at the same time. You can't blame that on Reagan. A lot of our own problems were of our own making. The rest of the country started booming from about 1983 on. In fact, the country right now is in the longest post-war boom ever, frankly, on record. And I think that's largely attributed to the successes of the Reagan administration and their economic policies and their national defense policies and their foreign policies.
Whatever your opinion of Ronald Reagan, the effects of his presidency will undeniably live long after him. And one of the effects was to bring a national Republican convention to a predominantly Democratic state.
The convention has been great business for New Orleans and also the rest of Louisiana. It's been good for the hotels, the restaurants, the shops, and what's good for the Crescent City is also good for the rest of Louisiana.
It's the type of advertisement that means so much to tourism, our #3 industry in the state, and I don't know how many millions of dollars we would have had to spend in order to reach this type of a pedestal insofar as publicity, good publicity. We're getting a chance to vindicate ourselves from the World's Fair fiasco, and the people have just been tremendous in their response to how much they're enjoying Louisiana while they're here in New Orleans.
How good was it for the state's economy? Dr. Tim Ryan of the University of New Orleans says the 4-day gathering had a $138 million impact on the New Orleans area.
But the Republican convention, I believe the much more important economic benefit is the long-run impact that we get, the publicity and the opportunity we get to sell Louisiana. And those don't exist with those other, with either Mardi Gras or Super Bowl or something like that.
All of the hotels in the city and surrounding areas were filled up with convention goers. Restaurants all around the Superdome were also packed with conventioneers during the entire week. Even a new restaurant that just opened in the New Orleans Center shopping mall next to the Superdome was serving more customers than expected.
Oh, yeah, we've been having a lot of Republicans from the convention. Everybody's been visiting us from the Superdome. We've been having a lot of business.
In the stores, Republicans were buying there as well as looking for bargains, like this $800 pair of GOP shoes made just for the convention at Macy's department store. One store owner, Dave Lee of the jewelry showroom, says his business was better than normal because of the convention.
I think that the convention people that come from all over the country will be inclined to buy things here that they maybe wouldn't buy at home. They're here, they're on kind of a holiday, and mood prevails, and we find that true in all the locations.
There was even one store set up near the Superdome that sold nothing but Republican novelties. As you might expect, business was good during the 4 days of the convention. There were also vendors set up inside the dome for the delegates, where you could buy everything from Republican elephants, shirts, buttons, and hats. In fact, you can not only buy souvenirs in and around the Superdome, but you can also pose and have your picture taken with the present President of the United States, and also what may be the next President of the United States. Vendors at the Superdome said business was good in spurts, but not steady. One salesman, though, says Republicans tended to be better customers than the Democrats were in Atlanta last month at their convention.
Biggest sellers so far are the dollar buttons and these $2 buttons. They've been going real good. Sweatshirts have been moving too because we're the only vendor that have the sweatshirts in the dome. And I guess I understand it's chilly down on the floor, and they've been selling pretty good that way.
The political gathering not only drew the attention of delegates and shoppers, but also a riverboat full of 48 Russian citizens traveling down the Mississippi River with American citizens on a peace cruise that included Louisiana stops in Baton Rouge and New Orleans. With the convention meaning so much to Louisiana and the Superdome being an ideal setting for the event, Congressman Richard Baker of Baton Rouge, the leader of the state's delegation, said during the roll call of the states on national TV that Louisiana wants to have the GOP return in 4 years.
Madam Chairman, the great host state who invites you back in 1992. Yeah! Madam Chairman, the great host state who is always willing to cooperate with its great sister state now passes.
Louisiana passes.
By the reaction of the majority of those attending this convention in New Orleans, the Crescent City may have a good chance of luring a national convention in 1992. Democratic Governor Buddy Roemer wouldn't mind seeing another convention here in New Orleans. He was in the Crescent City talking to Republican leaders as well as business executives.
This week, Louisiana has showcased itself not only to the rest of the country, but to the world. For this reason, the state's top salesmen, including the governor, were in the Crescent City to put the state's best foot forward. Governor Roemer had no qualms about taking part in convention-related activities to try and sell the Bayou State and help turn the depressed economy around. Although the governor is a registered Democrat, he says he doesn't follow firm political party lines. However, since he's not a member of the GOP, Roemer could not participate in official convention activities inside the Superdome.
You know, I'd probably have trouble in either parties. I'm so hard-headed and so independent, and I believe in the party system, but only to a point. I mean, I'm an American, I'm a Louisianian, I'm proud to be a John Kennedy Democrat. I'm liberal on civil rights issues. That's why I'll never be a Republican. I think they're insensitive in that area, and I say that gently and very firmly.
The past 4 days, Governor Roemer took part in a lot of other convention-related activities to benefit the state. 2 days this week, the state's chief executive attended a reception at a private club across the street from the Superdome for major business executives and national news media wanting to know more about Louisiana. The Chambers of Commerce of Louisiana and the State Department of Economic Development brought in some of the state's best chefs like John Folse of Donaldsonville and Ralph Olin of Ralph and Kaku's Seafood Restaurant to prepare their specialties for the crowd of several hundred people each day.
To touch business leaders, congressional leaders, governors, and delegates to kind of explain one-on-one what Louisiana's all about and what we're doing differently now. I don't want to make a mountain out of it. We won't close a business deal here, but we'll set the predicate for other discussions, and that's what it's about.
The governor was not only promoting the state through personal contacts, but through the national and world media as well. Roemer made several live appearances during the week on various national and international broadcasts, including this one on a talk show on the C-SPAN cable network, the NBC Today Show, CBS News, and a radio show on the British Broadcasting Company. In addition, the governor held separate news conferences with Japanese and French journalists where he announced he will make an economic development trip to Japan next month on behalf of the state to seek new industry. Roemer also said he'll make a similar trip to Europe in the near future, and France would be his first stop. After being governor now for 5 months, Roemer says the changes he has made and the image of the state he's trying to project now is making it easier to sell Louisiana to the rest of the world.
Even if you have a better mousetrap, you have to sell it. And I think in terms of the Deep South, we have a better mousetrap right now. We're not there yet. We do fiscal reform. We keep the roots that we've planted this year growing. It'll get better and better. But compare us to any Deep South southern state, and I think investors in America will look at Louisiana first.
Entering this week, the big question was, who will George Bush pick as his running mate? Tuesday, the question became, can a Bush-Quayle ticket win in November?
I mean, it just doesn't excite me at all. I don't know Dan Quayle. I mean, if you look at it from a narrow perspective, that's not a good look, by the way. But if one were to do that, I don't think it does anything for the state. It surprised me, I think I said that yesterday, and I'll speak now in political terms. It seems to me, I know George Bush, I like him, he's a very decent guy, that he's got about 80 days to make his case to the American people. Why give up 10 days of it, or 15 days of it, or 20 days of the 80 to explain Dan Quayle? I was surprised by it.
Can the Bush-Quayle ticket win in Louisiana and national?
They certainly can, certainly in Louisiana. Louisiana in the last 10 elections has only voted Democratic 3 times. So they have an excellent chance in Louisiana and probably a 50-50 chance in the country.
And what about the possible use of influence to get Quayle into the National Guard rather than service in Vietnam?
Well, yes, he can get over it, depending on when he takes the skeletons out of the closet and what they look like. I mean, the question is whether a Quayle will become an albatross. And there is a danger that he'll be seen as less than patriotic for not serving in the Vietnam War, and this would hurt him in Louisiana.
It should also be noted that Quayle did serve in the National Guard at a time when others were choosing another option, leaving the country.
Some final thoughts from here in New Orleans. This convention has brought to Louisiana some badly needed positive press. It has also given Louisiana a financial shot in the arm, with thousands of delegates and tourists spending millions here.
So even in the short run, I believe it will be a very good investment for both the city and the state, and in the long run implications make it a tremendous deal for both.
But more importantly, this convention has convinced the world and reminded many of us here in Louisiana that this state is indeed a good place to live.
New Orleans, I think, will come out of this convention with a very, very good residue of goodwill from everybody who came here, the delegates, particularly the national press, the people I've talked to, people who hadn't been here before. I'd been here before, so it didn't surprise me. But a lot of folks hadn't been here before, didn't realize that a place as unique and as, I don't know, exciting existed in this country. And so I think a lot of the folks who came here to cover this convention will come back someday on their own. And I've talked to a lot of them who will, said, I want to come back here as a real person sometime and just enjoy the place.
That's our show for this evening. Thanks for watching. Next week, a forum on the upcoming special session dealing with tax reform. Till then, I'm Ken Lormand. Have a good weekend. Thanks for watching.
Funding for the production of Louisiana, the State We're In, is provided in part by the Ziegler Foundation of Jennings and Gulf States Utilities, helping Louisiana bridge the gap to our energy future.